right. Well, good morning, everybody. So my name is Colbert from VMware, obviously. And the previous talk was all about cameras and eyesight and stuff, which is super cool. I'm here to talk about IT, which is not quite as cool, but very important. And I want to talk about a shift in mindset that we need to make in IT that's fundamental to how we continue to innovate as businesses. And I'm going to do this, I'm going to motivate this through this question of who feeds Paris? So who feeds Paris? So this is the question that was asked by Charles Whelan in his 2002 book, Naked Economics. And the question is pretty simple, actually, right? You take a large city, Paris, millions of people in that city who eat, 3 or more times a day, and somehow they're able to get all the food they need, right? I mean, think about us here in Sophia. Think about this bottle of water I'm holding. How is it that this water in here made it into my hand? Where did this water come from? Some stream somewhere? How many different companies, how many different people did this thing pass through before it got to me? Charles Whelan specifically stated, somehow the right amount of fresh tuna makes its way from a fishing fleet in the South Pacific to the restaurants on the Rue de Rivoli. Somehow, a neighborhood fruit vendor has exactly what his customers want every morning, from coffee to fresh papayas, even though these items may have come from 10 or 15 different countries. I mean, it really is mind-boggling, right? I mean, just think about it. Think about the supply chains. Think about the complexity. Think about where this water came from and how exactly it got into my hand. And yet we know how this happens, right? At a high level, at least. It's all about a free market. It's all about individuals not talking to anyone, just taking initiative, restaurants, vendors, wanting to start a business, finding sources for the food, working with supply chains, distributors, etc., and building all that out. So it's a free market that enables these sorts of capabilities, these sorts of abilities to deliver food to us. And we see that it's actually quite the opposite with centrally planned economies. Centrally planned economies, as we've seen historically, don't work. Centrally planned economies, when someone's trying to understand, the total amount of food that's needed for a city, they typically, sometimes overplan, but more often completely underplan and completely miss it. So free markets are what enable this. But if it's so clear that central planning, the central planning model, just doesn't work, why is it that central planning is the model we use in IT? Now, if you think about it, when you engage with IT, and I mean, you all work at various types of companies, right? And you probably have to engage with your IT people. And you probably, when you do it, it kind of feels like, if you need to go to IT, it feels like you take a number and you get in line, right? You need to do something, you want to do it quickly, but of course you can't. IT's got to go and figure out, some advanced plans. You got to fill out some sort of forms. You got to get in line. You got to wait maybe 3 months or a year for whatever it is to roll out those things. You got to understand what resources are needed and how to plug those in to the overall roadmap according to everything else that's happening. And so this is a problem, right? Because it really inhibits business innovation and business agility. Now, there are good reasons for this. Yes, it is slow. Yes, it is painful. But there are good reasons that IT works in the way that it has traditionally. The whole point is to prevent chaos, prevent things from breaking, right? IT is really charged with making sure that things continue to work, that business-critical services stay up and running. And if they let people just go into their data centers willy-nilly, adding new servers, like racking and stacking things, plugging in cables, it would be chaos, right? I mean, people would make mistakes, they'd set things on fire, they'd break things, who knows what would happen in there. And so this is what IT is trying to prevent. So it does make sense that IT does this, but at the same time, I feel like we're really inhibiting business innovation. So the question is, how can we get that same sort of control in the terms of not breaking things, but at the same time allowing us to go faster, allowing all these different businesses that we're a part of to innovate more quickly? And it comes back to this concept I like to call self-service. And self-service is everywhere in the world today, right? So let's take one example here. The idea with self-service, if you think about the Paris example, all these different restaurants, they don't need to wait for anyone. They can go and interface with different vendors, different distributors to go find the foods they want to get to their restaurants. In this case, let's talk about FedEx. Simple, shipping company. Now, in this model, what happens is that I can go to the FedEx's website, and I can input a few simple pieces of data, as you see here, right? Where's my package going? How much does it weigh? And when do I want it to get to where it's going? Based on that, FedEx gives me a price. Very simple, right? And I can choose whether that price makes sense for me or not. Does it make sense for me as a business? Now, as it turns out, behind the scenes, there's an incredible amount of complexity here that FedEx is managing. You know, all sorts of massive logistics and distribution systems and planes and cars and trucks and all this, and they have all sorts of, you know, great algorithms about how to like minimize left turns in cities so they can like ship things faster. I don't really care about any of that. I just care about what's the service I'm getting, and there's an SLA associated with that, right? So it's this nice, very simple self-service model. This is what FedEx gives me. And so, pardon me, the question is, how can we enable this within IT? How can I go to IT and get the same sort of really simple, immediate service? So how do we do that? Well, not to get too technical, I want to dive in a little bit of technology here. But the basic idea is, if you look at most data centers today, right, they've got a bunch of physical hardware, compute, storage, network, these various types of things. So there's this technology called virtualization. We at VMware obviously have pioneered virtualization of compute with our vSphere technology, and many businesses are now doing that. But you also want to be able to virtualize network as well as storage. And the idea here is that once you virtualize things, you create software abstractions. The power of software is that you can automate it, right? It's really hard to automate reality, but you can automate software very easily, because there's now API calls. You can manipulate these software objects much more easily. And so once you have everything virtualized, you can now automate it, so you have this automation layer on top of that. That means you can provision workloads, you can set up networks, you can configure storage, you can connect it all together. It all works very nicely. So you have the automation layer, you have some layer of policy that goes along with that. Policy says who can do what, right? Gives some basic form of governance. And then once you have that, you can actually create that same sort of self-service portal that we saw with FedEx. So here as a user, I can come in, I've got a set of things I can go and order, right? We see different types of things here. I might need to get my job done. But the important thing is, just like with FedEx, I don't need to go talk to anybody, right? I just need to go to the website, order what I need, I get it, I can start moving. This is very different from traditional IT, where I have to get in line, work with different folks from IT, a lot of people interactions, which slows everything down. So the self-service notion is really what we're trying to do within IT to make things move much faster. So that's great. If we can get there, it's amazing. But as I said, it's about changing mindset. So what are some of the mindset changes we need to make? So again, we look at this request mechanism, taking a number. So how does that work? You make a request, you talk with IT about it, you plan out what resources you need, and based on that, again, months or maybe a year or more later, you go and provision those resources within the data center. Again, I think a lot of us are familiar with this sort of process, and it takes quite a while, and it's sort of painful, but eventually we get what we need. But in the self-service model, we actually had to turn this whole thing on its head. We actually had to provision resources before the request comes in, which is kind of mind-boggling, right? So let's go back to FedEx. So have you ever gone to FedEx or to UPS or any of these guys and said, hey, here's my package, I want to ship it, I need to get it to New York or wherever in a couple of days? And have they ever come back and said, oh, sorry, our trucks are full, we can't do it, we're going to go build a new truck for you, come back in 2 months when our new truck is built? It's like never happens. And in fact, it'd be absurd for that to happen, right? You'd be like, what's wrong with you guys? I'm going to go somewhere else and ship my package. I need it shipped today, not in 2 months. And yet this is what we deal with regularly with IT. Constantly, making a request and waiting for it. And it's actually a testament to FedEx and the other shipping companies, because they don't know when you're going to ship your package. They don't know what you're going to do ahead of time. But they have to make sure they have enough trucks and people and planes and everything else to get any packages that may come to their destination on time when you say you want it. And again, today we're failing with that at IT, or with IT. So we have to fundamentally turn that equation around, and IT needs to pre-provision resources before any requests for those resources are made. This is, again, it's a pretty fundamental shift in thinking. Now, the other question that sometimes people ask is, hey, is this going to lead to total chaos? This whole notion of people self-service requesting things, all these new workloads being added to the data center without any real IT oversight, is this going to create all sorts of problems? And again, let's go back to Paris here. It's a free market economy, the same thing we're trying to create within IT. Is Paris total chaos, or Sofia, or any place? And the answer is no, right? I mean, these are cities. They're well regulated. They're well run. They have great food, great art, great museums. I mean, this is like kind of pinnacle of Western society. So it's quite the opposite. So it's not about having total control, which is what IT typically has tried to get, is total control, but it's about having the right sort of control. So think about most city governance codes, right? So if you want to go build a new building, if you want to extend your house in some way, or do something like that, yeah, you need to go get a permit for that, right? It makes sense, because you're doing something that might impact others. You're doing something people need to be sure that it's safe. The building you're in is safe. It's not going to collapse randomly and kill people. And so it makes sense to have a little bit more friction there to vet your ideas. But if you want to change the color of your house or change the menu at your restaurant, you don't need to go to anyone to get permission for that. You just go do it, right? If you want to switch from being a restaurant that serves seafood to serving some other type of food, again, you don't need to get any permission. You just go do it. And yet, with IT today, they obsess about what's on the menu, right? About what type of food you're serving, which doesn't really make any sense. Because again, that's not something they should care about. They should care about the plumbing and the infrastructure, making sure it runs well, but not exactly what each line of business is doing, what these workloads specifically are doing. So I think the key here is not having total control of the system, which again, centrally planned economies typically try to do, but having the right sort of control, which means giving up a little bit of that control to give the lines of business and these different people trying to do things more freedom. Now, the key aspect of doing this really goes back to this management layer I talked about. So this management layer is really key in controlling a lot of these things. So if you think about Paris or Sofia or any city, there's a government. And the government governs. It has some sort of control by doing this. And you can think of this notion of governance applying to the data center in the same way it applies to a city. You want to have rules and regulations about what people can do. Now, again, you don't want total control, right? You don't want some absolutist thing, but you want enough so that people don't hurt each other. So this is where this policy layer becomes really, really important, because it specifies what people can do in the data center. Can they create different sorts of virtual machines? Can they create networks? Can they create storage? What sort of SLAs can they get? What can they connect together? What sort of firewall rules? I mean, these are all the things that go into creating workloads that are running within the data center, and you need to be able to enforce certain sets of rules so people don't stomp on each other and break things, so on and so forth. And this is exactly what this sort of layer of management here enables. So we from VMware have this management layer software for that. There's other folks that do that as well. But the point is, you add governance to your data center in the same way you can imagine a city having governance. And it's really, really critical. The other aspect of this is capacity management. So as I said, you have to provision workloads before requests come in. And this is kind of challenging. If you think about, again, going back to the city example, if I were to move here to Sofia or move to Paris, it's not like I contact the government ahead of time saying, hey, I'm coming, you guys need to go build me a house, right, or whatever. And they're like, and like if that were to happen, I have to wait probably a year for my house to get built. That's insane. I want to move today. And so as opposed to people dealing with individuals moving into their cities, they look at the aggregate number of people moving in and leaving and the aggregate amount of housing stock, and they make sure those things are roughly in line and that it's growing in the right direction. Similarly with the data center. Today, if you want to move into a data center, you do have to wait for that house to be built effectively. And so in order to flip that on its head, what you have to do is actually look at the aggregate number of workloads moving into your data center, and then look at how much resources you have to supply all those workloads, and do those things match up? And if not, you got to fix it and make sure that you're ahead of the curve there. So thus far, we've been talking mostly about on-premises workloads, things that happen inside your data center. But as you guys all know, it's not just about what happens inside your data center in the private cloud, if you will. It's also what happens in the public cloud. So pretty much every company today is using some sort of public cloud resources. And the beauty of the public cloud is that they do actually solve this self-service challenge. This is why the public cloud is so popular, because it's super easy to go there and get resources immediately. You don't need to wait for anything, right? You just go and request it. So So we're seeing a lot of businesses using public cloud and building that out, and that's great. You can move fast and get what you need. The challenge, though, is, again, it goes back to that governance challenge. What are people doing in the public cloud? Are they abiding by the rules and regulations of IT? And that's where I think we hit a lot of roadblocks and a lot of challenges. Because people are going out to the public cloud, they're not obeying the rules of IT. They're doing things that aren't in compliance, that don't have the proper security, or don't necessarily have the correct connections back to your on-premises workloads. And so what you want to be able to do is extend that management and governance layer to apply not just to the private cloud, but also to the public cloud, so you can cover both of those. And this is really, I think, the key challenge for companies today, is how do you enable that sort of innovation happening both in the private cloud as well as the public cloud, and enable people to go quickly, but adding the right sort of governance and the right sort of controls. So if you're doing it properly, you see a model like this, right, where your users can come in, they can go get what they need. It can be private cloud services, it can be public cloud services, it can be whatever you want. And there's all sorts of different issues around lock-in to public clouds, or using higher-level services, in the case of Amazon, like Dynamo or Lambda or anything else. And do you want your employees to be able to access all those things? So this sort of control is really, really key. But as I said, it's not total control, but it's the right level of control, just like you have in a city. And if you can do this properly, what it enables is really the ability to go quickly while also not breaking things. Because that was the original intent of IT, right? The reason they put all this process, heavyweight process and control in place was to try and prevent people breaking things. And so if you can do this properly, what it enables is you as a business to go very fast, to innovate, to have that sort of agility, while at the same time having the right sort of control. And this involves a very, very big mind shift, right, from IT. It involves new technologies, involves things like self-service, involves things like capacity management and planning ahead of time before these requests come in. And of course, it's very, very different than what we're traditionally used to doing. But if we can internalize this new methodology, this new mindset, then we can fundamentally unleash business innovation and business agility. And the businesses that are able to do that will fundamentally be better than their competitors who can't, right? So this is not just a question of like IT and cool technology, it's actually a question of business differentiation fundamentally. So if we internalize this mindset, then we can actually get back to the question we asked at the beginning. So who feeds Paris? Well, the right answer is to let Paris feed itself. Thank you very much.